Now, as I mentioned, the UK is facing the extension of hate crime legislation to include the charge of misogyny. In line with current hate crime legislation, the charge will require no evidence of hateful motivations, but rather be governed by the perception of the victim or any witnesses. This shameful waste of police time will offer another avenue for malicious women to use the law to harm innocent men, as well as diverting precious resources from the fight against actual crime. And don't think that these crimes won't be acted upon by sensible officers. A perception of indifference from the police in such circumstances will be treated, as it is with current hate crimes, as secondary victimisation, with Greater Manchester Police clarifying that action will be taken against police accused of indifference towards victims, and whether or not it is reasonable for them to perceive it that way is immaterial. End quote. Family courts have been infested with feminist ideology too, resulting in fathers routinely being cast out of their homes and having their relationships with their children destroyed, even whilst being held responsible for their financial requirements. Then there is the gender justice gap for those convicted of crimes, which we'll hear more about from Jordan Holbrook tomorrow. Sex discrimination in the UK criminal justice system has a long history. For example, flogging as a punishment for female criminals was banned in 1820, but continued for men until 1967. Presently, men account for around 95% of the total prison population, despite only committing 3.4 times more crimes than women. Factors that explain this disparity include a greater percentage of convicted men being sentenced to prison, men being given longer sentences on average than women being paroled earlier than men, despite being more likely to be disciplined for bad behaviour whilst incarcerated, and women being more likely to have mitigating factors such as age, dependence, lack of previous relevant convictions, and the appearance of genuine remorse applied to their sentences. Feminist activists such as Women in Prisons, Baroness Corston, and Julie Bindel have committed themselves to widening the gender justice gap enabled by myopic and sentimental authorities. Feminism is a threat to meritocracy. The cultural obsession with the gender pay gap is driven by disingenuous, authoritarian feminists with no regard for personal choice, meritocracy, or human well-being. The focus is exclusively on the mythical glass ceiling, with no interest paid to the fate of those men employed in the glass cellar, dangerous and dirty jobs that women don't want, who are increasingly at risk of unemployment due to automation, as well as the ever-present risks of workplace injury and death. Quotas are being used by many organisations which discriminate against men, sometimes Caucasian men specifically. This is not only immoral in that it unfairly disadvantages individuals, but also frankly stupid, with the potential to impair the functioning of sectors rejecting meritocracy and therefore the economy and society in general. Battles are being fought to acquire equal pay for women performing similar or even sometimes dissimilar roles to their male counterparts, regardless of relevant facts such as whether they work fewer hours. For example, the BBC's former China editor, Carrie Gracie, was awarded £280,000 in back pay to bring her earnings in line with John Sopel, the North America editor, despite the fact that his job was more intensive and he was on air significantly more than her. She's donated her payout to the Fawcett Society. There are also several battles raging to secure equal pay for mainly female supermarket store workers as mainly male warehouse workers. An Asda spokesman clarified, in response to coverage consistently suggesting otherwise, that at Asda, hourly paid colleagues doing the same job in the same location are paid the same. Men and women doing the same job in our retail stores are paid the same. Men and women doing the same job in our distribution centres are paid the same. Pay rates in stores differ from pay rates in distribution centres for legitimate reasons." End quote. Differences in comfort, exertion and safety in the roles have been labelled as entirely illegitimate reasons to offer different levels of pay to workers in the coverage of the stories. Unfortunately, the courts look likely to agree. Feminism is a threat to men. Feminism attacks male-only spaces and male interests. Traditionally, male and female-only spaces have existed as the norm in every culture. Men hunted together, explored together, and enjoyed ritual space that allowed men and fathers and sons to bond. Later, they would create numerous social clubs and guilds. During the last 30 years, though, a monumental shift has happened, which has seen doors to venues that offer male space nailed shut or rendered strictly unisex, thanks to equalities legislations that feminists have worked so hard to institute, and which are conspicuously only ever applied to male space, never female space. It's now literally illegal for men to formally gather alone, a behaviour classed as oppressive to women. This mean and bitter assault on freedom of association is surely a barrier in the way of some men finding intimate and supportive networks of like-minded peers who could share experiences, have one another's backs, and express themselves freely. And that's probably why it's so important to the feminist project. Feminists have colonised and at least attempted to lobotomise video games, comics, rock music, action films, even Lads Mag Loaded, which closed down a year after they decided to be far more discerning and sophisticated in their depiction of women. Lad culture comes under sustained criticism, with the National Union of Students producing a report called That's What She Said, based on interviews with a whole 40 women. It cited negative attitudes towards feminism as being among the problematic behaviour associated with lads on campus, and sports and other extracurricular activities as being key sites where such behaviour arose. The report acknowledged that policy frameworks to tackle lad culture have had no impact on sexual assault rates where they've been pursued in US universities, and goes on to suggest policy frameworks to tackle lad culture in UK universities, apparently simply because they don't like it. Feminism attacks male behaviour and masculinity. Regardless of whether a behaviour is innocuous or women engage in equivalent or even the same behaviour, if a man does anything, feminists oppose it. In the last few years, catchy feminist portmanteaus such as manspreading, mansplaining and manterrupting have proliferated and become ubiquitous in their use. The aim is to shame, silence and bludgeon men into compliance. Masculinity as a whole is vilified and demonised in our societies. The endeavour begins at school, intensifies at university and in the workplace increasingly, and reaches a tragic crescendo in family courts, where men are denied access to their children, who would bring such critically important meaning to their lives and be the ultimate expression of their masculinity. Feminism is a very direct threat to men's literal freedom, as I've already discussed. But the current state of affairs is not enough for some feminists who want to see men not guilty till proven innocent, but guilty upon accusation. Julie Lalonde, an expert brought into Ottawa University during the hysteria around a rape allegation that proved false to tackle the institution's rape culture, believes that every time we see a high-profile sexual assault trial result in an acquittal, it sends women back 50 years. Feminism is a threat to women. Feminists seek to dictate women's behaviour. They objectify women by rejecting their autonomy and deny them respect. Tolerance is a noble attitude to take that's consistent with living in a diverse and pluralist society, but the feminist preachers of tolerance exercise very little. They attack women who reject the feminist label and those who make the wrong choices, to be a cam girl, a stay-at-home mother, or a conservative, for example. Even those who do identify as feminist but challenge mainstream feminist dogma. And feminism threatens its own female true believers. If you can convince a woman that she's disadvantaged, you make her so.